Hello, good afternoon, ma'am. So, this is Lloyd Garcia from BSED 1, and I will be talking about the communication in the workplace and also the barriers of communication when it comes to the workplace. And I will also speak of some strategies on how to avoid possible barriers of communication inside the workplace. So, first, you gave us a link or a presentation about the workplace on in communication, and these are some of my notes. So I've also learned that communication is a process of sending and receiving information. We all know that communication is an important part of a person's life because we communicate not to just receive and send information, but to also give our opinions, to express ourselves, and so on. So communication is also um, done through sending emails, especially in workplace. It is very important to send emails, especially with some memos, some payrolls, and so on. And also, we can give or send letters as a part of the communication process, and also formal presentation. This is actually very important and very common in the workplace when we present our teaching process, we present some proposals in the workplace, and so on. So next is the features of effective communication. So one of the features of ineffective communication is to provide practiced information. Second is to give factual information. Third is to clarify or condense information, and so on. So an effective communication is done when the receiver itself understands the notions of the sender. So those are just one of the detailed explanation of some features of effective communication. So right now, I've also saw in the presentation that we have two kinds or types of communication. We have the internal and external communication that is based on the communication inside the workplace. And also I've seen that there is a communication networks wherein we categorize it into formal network and informal network. And I've also seen the word grapevine, which actually doesn't come to my mind at first, especially with the definition in it. And I saw that it is actually a secret means of disseminating information inside the workplace. And I think that grapevine is actually a very confidential process because you don't just um, send information to other people publicly, but this is a secret way or means of disseminating information. Now, let's proceed with the barriers or the problems in the communication process or effective communication. So I saw in the other link that you've sent that I saw that a quotation from George Bernard Shaw, which actually is actually a good quotation to wrap up this entire thing. That the single biggest problem in community is the illusion that it has taken place. I believe that is actually a problem nowadays that we put an illusion to a certain context that we come to be ineffective with our communication. For example, we communicate with other people, but at the same time we actually give give a spectrum that we could be misinterpreted, we could be misinterpreted in a way because we thought of that, and that happens because of that certain thought. So right now we will going to proceed. In workplace, it might not seem to be a problem, but there's actually, or it actually can root to a lot of problem, especially in the workplace. For example, low productivity, which is a bad thing to happen inside a workplace because when your employers are not productive with their work, most probably their work would not be as effective as how the entire work system inside the workplace would work. So everyone should be productive so that you know the entire vibe and the entire process inside the office or the workplace would be very comfortable. Next is low staff morale. And lastly is mediocre customer service. I would agree with the mediocre customer service. Why? Because if an employer or I mean an employee is given a bad communication process or was given a bad information or misinterpreted information, most probably he or she would also reflect that to his or her customers. For example, I actually worked in a call center agent or BPO industry where we were trained for like 2 weeks only. So yes, I've not fully understand the process at all. So when it came to the the actual experience of call center, I had problems, minor problems about how does this work and how does this work. So it really reflected to my customer service, and that is one of the problems that should be taken with a solution. Next is I saw that it is said that communication is important in the workplace, which is true because in the workplace it is a critical industry wherein you provide services to your customers and so on. Now we see that there are five barriers of communication. So it was stated there that first barrier is the lack of clarity. So of course, you should be clear with what you say and what you provide for the people, especially your employees and your colleagues. Because if you provide them a very confusing information or context, of course they will not understand it. So get straight to the point and say what you want to say. And yeah. Next is inconsistency. I would say that this is an important thing that you should always remember, that you should not be inconsistent with your words and with your style. If you talk to a student with respect, you also talk with your colleagues with respect and other people actually. Next is the language differences. Of course, we cannot avoid that there are some people who doesn't speak English fluently or other language fluently, so that should be taken into consideration, that we should put our shoes in their position. We should put our feet in their position. That we should understand them. That we should not judge them. That instead we should teach them, and comprehend. Next is do not enough listening. This is an important thing, but it is also hard, especially when you are, debating. Speak when it's your time to speak, but also listen when it's your time to listen. It's not always that you're the only one who should speak and speak, that you should not listen, but there's also time that you need to listen, because speaking and listening are both integrated things. And if you don't listen, then you wouldn't able to speak your mind. So you should be able to listen to that person. Next is the non-verbal cues. These are one of the most less noticeable traits or communication process, but this is actually very critical because this could be taken differently. So when you present like this, I use this kind of nonverbal cues to emphasize my the information that I'm providing. But in the workplace, you should be very careful with your nonverbal cues because it is a very professional and a formal setting, and your nonverbal cues should also be very appropriate in that setting. And now let's proceed with the strategies. So these are some of the strategies that I can provide in order for a better communication or effective communication in the workplace. First, communicate only what is needed. So for example, you are only asked to provide this kind of information, then you should also talk about this only. You should not go outside of the box because it would, confuse people. Next is to avoid slangs. We all have our different slangs that could mostly are informal. So those are not needed and not appropriate in the workplace. Next is be aware of cultural differences. Cultural differences. For example, in our classroom, we have a Muslim classmate. So of course, when we talk to our fellow Christian classmate, we should also talk to our fellow Muslim classmate with such respect to their culture, so that she would not be offended. And same goes with in the workplace. Next is be open-minded. Of course, when you're asked question or when you are asked a question or you are given some constructive criticisms or what, you should be open to that. You should not be very close or narrow-minded that you would lash out and be angry with that. You should always be open-minded because life is an open experience, and there's always a room for improvement. So be open. And lastly, use social media well. In this time of technology, advanced technology, we use social media as a means to provide information. For example, this time in pandemic, there are a lot of workplaces that have been affected by the pandemic, but they are using social media as a means to communicate with their colleagues and to their company. So, just because it is used, the social media is used, we should always, or they should always, use social media properly or appropriately based on the setting of the workplace. For example, a teacher should always give information to them speaking as a teacher, as a formal or professional teacher, not just a friend in Facebook. So that is some of the strategies that I could provide in order to have an effective communication in the workplace. I hope you've learned something. Thank you.